that control the narrative of how the public is to perceive everything. And so I used to watch television to see what are they going to do next. You know, I knew they were deceiving people, but after a while, it hurts your brain to watch somebody lying to you and know that this is the information that there's a lot of people who are watching this same information and are completely believing it. And it's very disturbing. And so, you know, I've turned off CBS and all the different networks some time ago, and, you know, strictly look at, you know, videos on Rumble or whatever, you know, watch your channel and other people who I feel are reputable, to try to get more of an insight of what's actually going on. And how do you break out of it is the question. It's a hard one. It's a hard one because it's hard for somebody ever since their childhood that has trusted that one-eyed monster in the corner of the room to be giving you information and to think that it's been deceiving you toward an agenda that's not for humanity all these decades. And so it's a hard one. It's like, you know, and people are starting to realize that, you know, even medical advice on the television could, if you don't know what's going on, can be harmful to you.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome back to Exopolitics Today Dan Willis, who has released a paper on his website that deals with a very important topic, and we're going to go through with that, and we're going to examine some of the key elements that Dan brings up, and of course his own personal experiences with this topic. So welcome, Dan, to the show.
Michael, always a pleasure to join you, especially on this topic. It's such an important one. Our planet's been hijacked, so to speak, to keeping us from that Star Trek future.
Let's begin with how you got involved on this UFO issue back in 1969 when you're working in naval communications. You got a top secret clearance and you receive a report about a 70-foot flying disc. So what happened in that incident, and what happened subsequently that introduced you to this topic concerning psychological operations?
Well, you know, as a child, I was fascinated with the idea of being in contact with other beings, and I loved science fiction movies. I thought it was just science fiction. And when I was working in naval communications, I received a report where the sailors on board a Navy ship off the coast of Alaska were witnessing a 70-foot diameter disc that emerged out of the ocean off port bow and shot going over 7,000 miles per hour, according to the radar operator on the ship. It was a secret classified priority message going to the Chief of Naval Operations. This was a real message, so and, you know, I couldn't imagine anything what it could be, and it basically seeded my interest in the subject because, you know, I looked for indications in the newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, try to see if something kind of disclosure of this information was going out. But over the decades, I realized that this is kept secret from the public. And so, you know, for many years, I've, you know, looked for indicators to try to understand why is this being kept secret from the public. You know, in 1993, I traveled to Area 51 to meet with Bob Lazar and a bunch of researchers, and he was giving his account of reverse engineering extraterrestrial craft. And I knew this was kind of a key to understand what's going on. Apparently, they were taking this technology and keeping it secret for military purposes. In 2001, an event that you're very familiar with,
Well, before we get to that, I
Yes.
just wanted to kind of like, that incident in 1969, you had firsthand experience of this UFO report kind of like getting suppressed under something called JNAP 146, which is Joint Army Navy Air publication that came out, I think, in 1959, 52, and was used to threaten military personnel with fines up to $10,000 and 10-year imprisonment if they break their silence on
10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 years in prison. So how did your kind of like experience with that one in 1969, you got JNAP 146 hanging over your head if you kind of like come out and talk about this. So how did all of that shape your understanding of government secrecy and psychological warfare on the UFO topic?
Well, it's very apparent it was a topic that they wanted to extremely, put the lid on. They didn't want this out. They another JANIP document for people who were pilots, civilian and military, the same thing, just like sailors or aircraft. Anybody spots these things, they're supposed to not say anything. So there seems to be, you and I have been studying the history of this for some time, and it goes all the way back 30s and 40s, and much authenticated documentation of how there has been an extreme effort in order to keep disclosure from happening to the public. I believe it started out legitimately, where they wanted to retrieve advanced technology in order to have a military advantage over adversaries. But then it got a bit sticky with some of the agreements that were made with regressive extraterrestrials that it would make it very difficult and for it to come out to the public. And so and then you have the different elements. You have religious elements, you have the church, you've got you got the military. I know that when after Admiral Byrd's defeat, James Forrestal wanted to go public with this, and your wonderful book on JFK. What was the title of that one again?
Kennedy's Last Stand.
That's it. That's an awesome book. It goes into the whole detail of the whole thing. But they murdered him. They didn't want that to come out. And the person that the MJ-12 member that they replace him with is Walter Beadle Smith, who was a general and CIA director who became the new MJ-12 member, who wrote a CIA memo to use this they called it flying saucers back then in the 50s, to use it for psychological warfare. And just a few months afterward, you have George Adamski claiming to have contact with space brothers from Venus, and he takes a photograph, and it's identical to the Nazi Haunebu 2 design, which shows that it was a Nazi CIA psyop in order to make the people believe that if they see any craft that's unusual, flying saucers, that, oh, it's the Space Brothers from Venus. This way it keeps secrecy using the psychological warfare of any advanced anti-gravity craft, which we know the US developed in 1954, 20 years behind Nazi Germany that developed it back in 1934. So it's been the original intention was, to have advanced technology and to protect the United States, using this type of thing. But I believe it got in the control of interests that did not have the best interests in humanity. They had self-serving interests, And the very first CIA director, Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was the MJ-12 member, warned about the dangers of this secrecy that was surrounding the whole UFO issue, so that he wanted to have congressional hearings in order to bring this out in the open. He was afraid that it was going to be hijacked, basically, and used by, extreme secrecy that Kennedy warned about in a speech about how the use of extreme secrecy does not justify the means to keep it secret. And so, as you know, back in 1955, Eisenhower did lose control to the corporations. And what happened was every president, CIA director, heads of intelligence, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your standing is in the intelligence community, you're denied access unless you're on this bigot list. And that's what brought about the 2001 event that I participated in, is that Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was denied, and he was not only denied, but he was threatened if he didn't drop looking into this, that he would lose rank and see an early retirement. And this was due to to the event I participated in with Bob Lazar back in 1993. The base Area 51 went into a complete lockdown and issued a NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, security advisory, which had a distribution list, which included these unacknowledged special access programs that were reverse engineering the extraterrestrial craft that Bob Lazar was working on. And he tried to look into it. And so our legal government has basically been out of the loop since 1955.
Very important to understand that. I think it's worth pointing out that on the one hand, you have secrecy on the issue, on the UFO extraterrestrial issue. And on the other hand, you have this kind of psychological warfare program, which has been created from the very beginning. That was how the MJ-12 committee kind of like dealt with this topic, to make it subsumed under this kind of like psychological warfare program that was part of the Cold War. So anything to do with UFOs was kind of lumped into psychological warfare. And they actually set up this, what was it? I think it was called the Psychological Strategy Board. And that was 1950. That was set up, and that was replaced by the Operations Coordinating Board in 1952. And Colonel Philip Corso sat on those boards as part of the kind of military intelligence community's contribution to psychological warfare. So yes, psychological warfare has been at the kind of heart of the UFO cover-up. So maybe just for those who are new to the term, do you want to explain what is psychological warfare?
Psychological warfare is the control of the public's perceptions. This is something I took a keen interest in, Michael, when I testified in Washington, with the place packed with reporters and 22 cameras. Being an ex-ABC newsman, I couldn't imagine how how the explosive testimonies that were given, how it could not have a world-changing event. And I didn't even know what Operation Mockingbird was. So Operation Mockingbird was started with Allen Dulles in 1950. They had 400 journalists that the CIA was giving them the information to disseminate to the public, to form the public's perceptions, and they were paying them. They figure, well, this is for national security, and here's a big check, so they went along with it. And as the years went by, there was like 50 media companies that were disseminating information in 1983, where they started in Sun Valley, Idaho, with the CIA meeting with all the heads of, and they do it every year, to consolidate control. And so they, today we have 6 corporations that control everything you see and hear. And this is important. In order to control the public's perception, you have to have a centralized control that's disseminating this information. I got an awakening of this, after with the rest of the witnesses, we're on CNN and, all the different networks. CBS flew down to have an interview with me, and I saw what CNN did with it, where we were disclosing we've had these technologies, 0-point energy. We don't need nuclear, oil, and coal. They flew down from Los Angeles to interview me for about 45 minutes. I said, I'm not, in the beginning, I said, I will not do this interview unless you can guarantee, I say, that we have the scientists willing to come forth in open congressional hearing that can prove we have a solution to the energy crisis with 0-point energy. They promised. Afterward, the producer said, I'm sorry, I never had this happen before, but the higher executives made me cut that part out. And so that started my research and investigation of who these higher executives are that are cutting out a solution to the world. And at the time, they were having rolling blackouts in California, and we're having pollution issues, and to suppress technology that could benefit all of humanity. You got a nefarious interest that's in control of our media.
Yeah, we have Operation Mockingbird as that program set up back then in 1950, and incorporating all of these bought assets that are controlled or bought either by the CIA or the military intelligence community and in your article, Counter-Disclosure Assets, you talk about how these assets are used by the intelligence community to maintain the secrecy and to hide the full truth, to confuse people or to counter the genuine disclosure to the public. And that's very important, that the key elements of psychological warfare, you have your bought and paid for assets who are pushed out there, and their job is to confuse people and to attack or target people who are putting out the truth. So you want to maybe just elaborate a little bit about how these bought and paid assets, whether it's under Operation Mockingbird or whether it's through a military intelligence program, they have these assets whose job is to create the confusion and to attack those that are the truth tellers.
Yes, their biggest fear is disclosure. The biggest fear is the public awakens to the deception that's been perpetrated for decades. The documents go back with the CIA showing that they've even infiltrated the clergy, the church, to control this issue, and that they have infiltrated UFO groups. They go in there and just to check and monitor them, make sure that they're, keep it in check. And today with social media, anybody can get on YouTube, get interviewed, and say anything. The problem is that, it took me a while to, probably you too, to start realizing some of these witnesses that are coming forth that are having total memory recall of their service in space 20 years and back. And age regression technology, and tried to understand how this all came about, which goes into a long history. You can't bring anything back. A lot of people say, well, show me the evidence, show me a piece of a spaceship, show me something that you can prove, have a photograph. But today anything can be faked. And so you have a situation where anybody can say something and not have any evidence to back it and still be credible. You know, let's take myself, for example. The other witnesses that I joined at the National Press Club were talking about 57 different extraterrestrial species categorized, faster than light craft developed back in the 50s, President CIA directors being denied access, bases on the other side of the moon, nukes being shut down, on and on. My testimony was minor compared to them. I didn't have any. Now, a lot of them brought official supporting documentation. Naval Commander Graham Bethune brought all his documentation. Head of FAA Investigations Division, although the CIA sworn him to secrecy and confiscated about this 747 Japanese airline that had this huge, it was like, it dwarfed it, the craft. They had radar, they had ground radar, military radar, they had computer printouts, they had all this stuff, and they confiscated it all from him, but he had backups, so he brought it with him, to the conference. Now, I wanted to bring supporting documentation, so I contacted the Office of Naval Intelligence, going through the Chief of Naval Operations, and I gave a lot of specifics of where the ship came from and what communication station, to see if I can get a copy of the report. But they said that the ship's logs get destroyed after a certain period of time. So unlike the other witnesses that were able to bring supporting documentation, I only had my word, to go by. Today, somebody can get onto YouTube and they can say, yeah, I've been on 20 and back, and I've been on Mars, and I've been on med beds, and I've been in the Solar Warden program, and they can put together this information just by watching a lot of YouTube videos. And we've got a lot of credible witnesses that are coming out, but then there are some that come out and you have to wonder, the information conflicts with other people. In fact, one of the things I look for is where somebody new all of a sudden pops up and they're being interviewed across all the YouTube channels, and everybody, and they're like on a mission to get their information out. But a lot of it sounds credible, but then they bring in information that is exactly opposite of what somebody else is saying, and it's to discredit somebody that's truthful and somebody that there are witnesses, there are experiencers, contactees out there that do have credible scientific evidence to back up what they're saying, and everybody has to do their own research to determine who those people are. And so,
well, that's a very important
yes.
part of the process. Something I do all the time is
Yes.
to do some vetting. I mean, I know people, there are people in the UFO community that kind of like, it's a whole spectrum in terms of like, those that do a really rigorous vetting and go all over the documents and the history and find any inconsistencies, and those that do absolutely no vetting at all and just like, well, you had this experience, so yeah, let's talk about it and put it out there. And so I try and do something in between. I try and do a little bit of vetting, and that really helps sort out those that are really assets, I think, of one of these psychological warfare programs, whether it's deep state, whether it's military intelligence community, because one of the, there are a few clues. One of the things that I always look for is how much that person wants to get their information out there. If they're in a great hurry to get the information out there, that's a clue. If they're willing to share documentation to prove things that they said, like for example, they say, well, I was out with my girlfriend and we saw this UFO and it landed and all of this happened. Well, can I talk to your girlfriend type thing? So, people who are willing to share the truth, they'll oblige with those kind of requests. But those that are assets, I mean, their job is to establish some sort of plausible narrative for why they should be interviewed, why they should get out there. So yeah, there are some clues, and there's no kind of easy way of doing it. You just got to have the experience. And sometimes you know who the disinformation people are, right off the bat. Other times it takes a long time to work it out.
Yeah, thank you for all the due diligence that you do, Michael. It's so critical in this world, to move forward. It's the only thing that's keeping us moving forward from the Star Trek future that we should have had, 50, 60 years ago. And, they don't have to be somebody new on the scene that's trying to get their message out all over the place. You can have people that came on the scene early, and they build up a narrative for some time. And then all of a sudden, they do something completely discrediting. And the purpose of that is to discredit the real secret space program people. In other words, you would have somebody that everything matches. It goes along. Is like 90% of it is true, and it matches, and you start to gain a following, and you start to believe that this person is credible, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they do something totally obviously, or claiming the Earth is flat or whatever. They do it for the purpose of, and this is what the intelligence agencies do. They put plants in, and so that the time bomb will go off later. And so the purpose of it is, and people who try to research this subject, what happens is it effectively maintains the counter disclosure, because people see all this conflicting information, or they see people that come out with that information and it matches what truthful people are saying, and then all of a sudden they're doing something discrediting. And what happens is, people in their mind, the average person just thinks, well, there's a lot of conflicting information, I don't know what to believe. And because people don't know what to believe, or have a sense of what's real and what's not, they just discount the entire thing. Throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. So that's one of the tactics that they use, is come in with a lot of truthful information and then become completely discrediting. And the purpose is to discredit the real people who are coming out with information. And the real people, it's hard to get evidence with these this subject, but there are some people that are coming out with real scientifically verifiable evidence that supports what they're saying.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, this is really a psychological warfare that is going on. There are the truth tellers, that we try as hard as possible to find the truth, and sometimes we might be fooled by people for a little while, but eventually we kind of realize what's going on, and we move on, and we learn, and we get better at it. And then there are those that are the assets of these psychological warfare programs, from wherever they come, and they use all of these really sophisticated tools and techniques to fool people, to get them to buy into their narrative. And as you say, 90% of it can be accurate, because that's how psychological warfare operates. You put out 90% of the truth, and then the 10% of the disinformation is designed to kind of get people to go down a particular path that will take them away from something very important that maybe they were on the verge of understanding.
Yes, deceivers have to work very hard because, you can imagine, the artificial intelligence bots on the internet that are trying to control the narrative, and they do all this elaborate work. Whereas if you're telling the truth, it's effortless. And the truth has a way of surfacing and revealing itself. And so they have to work extra hard in order to keep everybody confused and keep the truth from being disclosed.
Yeah, in your paper, counter-disclosure assets, you distinguish between military sock puppets, NSA trolls, and CIA shills. So you want to just elaborate on what are they?
Well, it's all part of the effort in order to control the public's perception. So these fake identities that come up, some are artificially, you can imagine the artificial intelligence has evolved considerably to create intelligent type of bots that can actually sound like real people, but what they do is they do counter narratives. So whatever the truth is that's coming out, they throw out a counter narrative in order to just keeps muddying the water so people don't know what to believe, and effectively maintains a counter disclosure.
So these NSA trolls, CIA shills, I mean, this all refers to a psychological strategy program or warfare program that's been going on for a long time. And in 2014, there was an Edward Snowden document that showed that this was really happening. It's called the Art of Deception, and that discussed these online deception programs, and some of these included UFO photos. So that showed that the Five Eyes intelligence community, that's Australia, Canada, Britain, United States, New Zealand, that they all collaborate in deceiving people using all of these psychological warfare strategies, and that the online community is a big target, and a UFO issue is one of the issues that they do this kind of psychological warfare on. You want to elaborate on that 2014 document by Snowden that was leaked?
Yeah, and going back to even 1950, it was a higher classification than the H-bomb to keep the secrecy on this. So yeah, it's an extreme effort that they use all their tools at disposal in order to gain control of the public perception. Because just imagine if you and I have been researching this for some time, and so it's a little different than the average person who has to, is just trying to survive on this planet and mainly uses television, for their source of information, or other sources that have been completely infiltrated and hijacked and are using against the people of the world. It's the block that is keeping us from going into the Star Trek future. I think I spent 10 years meeting with scientists and inventors trying to bring out a solution, which was just a nightmare. National security orders, thousands of inventions have been suppressed due to the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. They want to keep us technologically suppressed. They don't want the advanced technologies to come out, and the extraterrestrial issue is totally intimately connected with advanced technologies, and it kind of works in their favor that there's a prime directive with the Galactic Federation of Worlds, because you don't have an advanced race interfering with a race that's still evolving, and so we're not allowed to come in and intervene, but they work in balance. Since the Nazis had got quite a kind of jump on technologies back in the 30s with the Draco of the Sakaar Empire, that they're working in balance with the U.S. Navy to bring about a counterbalance for what happened with Admiral Byrd and the defeat and everything like that. Now we're on par or better than what they had back then. So, but still, the public doesn't have they're appearing more and more. Like on the International Space Station, they had 30 craft flying in front of it. They're making themselves known that they're here, but it's a very it's psychologically sensitive because we've been falsely indoctrinated for generations that it's a psychological shock to all of a sudden, hey, guess what? We've been lying to you for like 60, 70 years. And here's the extraterrestrials, and they have technologies. We have med beds. We've got a star fleet that's being built on the other side of the moon. That's a bit much of a stretch. People still think that's in science fiction realm. It's sad that it's been kept in science fiction, and people, it's comfortable to think that, oh, it's just science fiction. It's not, it's not real. But when you look into this, like you and I have, it's like, I know you must have had a lot of, oh my God, this is real moments in your research career looking into this.
Well, one of the things that really got my attention in doing the research was how the Navy was involved, both in the research and study and reverse engineering of extraterrestrial spacecraft and building a secret space program, but they were also involved in the psychological warfare aspect. In fact, Leslie Stevens III, he was the vice admiral that kind of like helped create this psychological operations board, the psychological strategy board that eventually Colonel Corso sat on. So Leslie Stevens III helped establish that, and he got his son involved later. That's Leslie Stevens IV, and he was the guy that created the Outer Limits, I think it was.
Right.
The Outer Limits, and he was the one that read in Gene Roddenberry to aspects of the Navy's secret space program and got Gene Roddenberry to put it out. And so Gene Roddenberry and the Star Trek is an outgrowth of this psychological warfare program that was started by the Navy to kind of like do two things. Was, two main objectives. Was one, you put the truth out there, but secondly, you do it in a way that kind of discredits anyone else revealing the truth. So you look at something like Star Trek, it's brilliant from a psychological warfare program. I mean, you're hiding the truth in plain sight. So it's presented in fiction. People see it all, the Federation of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and the different extraterrestrial species, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so it's all there. And so people are educated about this. But on the other hand, it's all presented in fiction, so that anyone coming forward and say, yeah, I was a part of a secret space program. It's like, oh, no, you watched Star Trek, or maybe you kind of got that idea from some other show.
Yeah, so you got beamed up, right?
So yeah, psychological warfare, using the entertainment industry, it's been happening for a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, the entertainment industry even actually started with 1951 with the day to Earth stood still. There was a lot of operations, but those seem more like white hat operations. Like Star Trek seems like more like white hat, but it's true. Yeah, they are involved in the psychological warfare. And you have to think about the last congressional hearing on UFOs, UAPs, where they had the director of naval intelligence saying, Mr. Gallagher, he's a representative from Wisconsin. He brought up the issue about the Admiral Wilson memo, which is a hot potato, and also about the Maelstrom Air Force incident with Captain Robert Salas, where they shut down 10 nuclear-tipped ICBMs. They didn't destroy them; they just shut them all down. And he brought the official Air Force Office of Special Investigations documentation that backed up his testimony. Now Mr. Gallagher put them on the spot, and they both say, oh, do you have anything like that? No, we don't have it in our archives. These people are supposed to be the ones that are authorities on the subject, and most people who do a little bit of research on the UFO subject are aware of the Maelstrom Air Force incident and the Admiral Wilson memo that came out. It was all over the place, which is very revealing. And both of them declined that they had any knowledge of it. Well, he says, well, if something authoritative comes my way that I can see, and he said, well, this is authoritative. I'm saying to look into it. So anyway, it was noted. And it's just kind of interesting that these people who are in charge of intelligence with the Navy are completely not acknowledging some of the history that happened. That was back in the it was like 1968 or something like that, the Maelstrom, and then in 2000, I think it was, you correct me, Michael, I think it was 2008, the Admiral Wilson memo came out, something like that. So it was fairly current. And it's very revealing that the Navy intelligence had no idea about this, that they're basically puppets put in place. They're counter-disclosure assets, in my view, that are protecting the narrative, like protect the narrative at all costs. and so, what's sad is there's an incredible world that could be realized, that these elements have deceived humanity for so many decades, and that we could have advanced cultural exchange with beings from other worlds that are benevolent and could aid mankind so that, sickness, disease. I think a lot of this was offered in the 1954 meeting with the Galactic Federation of Worlds with Eisenhower. And he wanted to go on radio and television and disclose this to the world in May, according to Gerald Light, who was one of the witnesses there. And then you have Francis McIntyre, who lied and spilled the beans to the Pope. And, the Vatican, you have a great article on, the Vatican's relationship with the control of this issue. And there's an authenticated document that talks about the Catholic Church wanting to have containment, of the issue. And so it's a crime against humanity. And the one thing that these elements that want to maintain the deception and not reveal the full disclosure are keeping humanity from that what you call a Star Trek future.
Definitely are. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in doing this research into exopolitics is how overall control of the whole kind of vast apparatus of special access programs has been gradually taken out of the hands of the kind of mainstream military and moved into the corporate sector. So you now have I think the Admiral Wilson memo incident, I mean, that really illustrates this so well, that the real power now is not so much with the military intelligence community, who's kind of play this secondary role, a role that the FBI used to play for the military intelligence. Now the military intelligence community are playing that role for the corporations that run these programs, which is to just keep it all secret, which is to kind of conduct these psychological operations, keep the public in the dark, but in the same time, the corporations are keeping the military intelligence community in the dark, as we see with Admiral Wilson. And only a few people from the military intelligence community are read in. And these are people who are kind of compromised or bought out and eventually fast-tracked into the corporate sector, and they become, assistant directors and so forth, or they sit on the board of directors, former 4 stars or 3 stars. So this is how they keep the secrecy, and forget about the general public. We're not going to get any of the truth of these special access programs. And if you're a member of Congress, well, you're just going to get a cover program. But even the sitting vice director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is what Admiral Wilson was back in 1997, when he inquired into this. I mean, even he's not given any look in. So now, I mean, we're talking 25 years since that time. I think the corporations have been able to kind of like monopolize this even more. So now we're in this situation, a unique situation on the planet, where all of a sudden you have the intervention of some of these more powerful extraterrestrial groups who are coming in to kind of like help level the playing field and kind of change it, and releasing the information through private individuals, you know, through direct physical encounters with members of the Galactic Federation.
Excellent point, Michael. Yeah, it is like you're the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, give me a break. You're not high enough security clearance in order to know what's going on. President Eisenhower in 1961, he tried to warn the public that beware of the unwarranted influences and misplaced powers within the industrial military complex. Only alert, knowledgeable citizenry can protect our future liberties and freedoms. He was aware, as General Stephen Lovkin was on his staff, that he had lost control to the corporations. And the corporations, as we know, have been infiltrated by the Fourth Reich, and that these operations have gone totally into the control of the corporations. And we know the mentality of a corporation is it's not very conducive for the benefit of humanity. That it's basically for its shareholders and its objectives and gains, and it could care less about anything else. And so you know, I could see where the Fourth Reich, which was supported by, as you know, a lot of corporations that worked, you know, with them in Antarctica and their secret space program down there. So yeah, we have it's not our government per se. When after I went to Washington, you know, to testify, I traveled across the United States in the major cities, and every place the media would make fun of it, you know. So it doesn't matter if you're an affiliate, you have to tote the line of what the corporate office is telling you to do. And where was I going with that? Anyway, I just lost my thought.
Yeah, well, the corporations now do have so much control and influence. And right now, of course, I mean, they are having this kind of unprecedented influence over a sitting presidential administration. I mean, this is what the Twitter files that are now that have been released by Elon Musk. I mean, what he's revealing is that this is a fascist system now that's been set up, that the Biden administration colluded, or Biden, while he was still campaigning for the election, and then subsequently they were colluding with major social media companies to influence the elections. And so after that, they continued down their merry way. Well, you know, what do you call a collaboration of government and corporations?
Fascism.
That's fascism. So we live right now in a fascist state. And the sad thing is that a lot of liberal progressives actually defend this. They defend it because they can't, in their minds, go beyond the idea that, well, somehow to criticize the Biden administration is going to open the door to, you know, the orange man,
right,
and his people. And it's like, yeah, but you know what, Trump, for all his flaws, I mean, he was never a guy that proposed this kind of like union between corporations and government. I mean, he was more you know, going for this kind of like decentralized view, or minimal government, if you like. But what we're seeing now is fascism in America, and you have like these anti-fascist people going out there attacking patriots who are pointing this out. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, the contrast between the two administrations is stunning. I remember what I picked off my thought when going around the country and we were trying to get people to write letters to their congressmen, senator, the president, and everything. People don't have time to write letters. It just doesn't happen. So I worked with a programmer and we put an online fax to contact the president and the representatives and senators, and I even had a database of embassies around the world, and I included that in it, and had about 30,000 faxes going out. And I was in charge of the Disclosure Project's website, and so I told people, send me your responses from your senators, congressmen, the president, and everything. So I had about 52 or 53 letters back from them, and after reading them all, it became quite apparent that they were given talking points of official letters of denial from NASA and Project Blue Book. And so they're all out of the loop, and they're all corrupt anyway, most of them, in our representatives. So at least a large percentage of them. So they, the government is one thing. The corporations that are controlling this, that have basically hijacked it, and I think it all happened back in the mid-50s, where Eisenhower lost control, and as Admiral Wilson found out that he had to meet with these corporate lawyers, that it's in the hands of the corporations.
And that is very worrying, because that means that if things don't change dramatically soon, that the truth about the extraterrestrial presence will just kind of like be hidden or be manipulated by this kind of like corporate government fusion that we're seeing right now, that this kind of like fascist state is in control of the UFO extraterrestrial secrets. And we don't know how and when they're going to release it. Now, I know that there is this kind of like a lot of people are questioning what has happened to this UAP report that was supposed to be delivered to Congress by the Pentagon and the Office of Director of National Intelligence back in October. And they're saying, well, where is it? And my guess is that maybe this is kind of like being held up because the deep state people can't decide whether or not they're going to like reveal some of what's really going on, but frame it frame it as a kind of like extraterrestrial threat, so that they can set up their false flag operation, or whether just kind of like pour cold water on it all and say, oh, there's nothing here, it's just air balloons and misidentification and so forth.
Yeah, there is definitely a concerted effort to make the public believe that we do not have the technological capability of anti-gravity craft. We're still using primitive rockets to go into space. It's all like an expensive prop show to show the public. But as we've developed anti-gravity all the way back in 1954. And one of the witnesses, Mark McClandish, who was going to testify at the previous 2021 UAP, kind of mysteriously committed suicide before doing so. And then you have Mike Tuber, Air Force intelligence specialist, who 2 years prior said that, oh, the UAP, that's the Tic Tac that's promoted so heavily, started with the New York Times, of course, at the core, New York Times, and it propagates out. So everybody's aware of it. It was actually, made by Lockheed. And then he comes back 1 week before Mark commits suicide, according to the report, that he made the whole thing up. I mean, how many people just make some dramatic statement like that and then come back and then they say, oh, well, I was just doing a psychological test, it really isn't real. I just made the whole thing up. It's very, very highly suspicious. So to me, it reeks of a extreme effort in order to keep the public from becoming aware, because both of those testimonies indicate that we have advanced anti-gravity craft. And Mark's testimony, which is quite explosive, and he had quite a bit of information on that these alien reproduction vehicles that were built back in the 1950s that go faster than the speed of light, they didn't want that out into the public mind. And so, you know, you have going all the way back to, I think, 1967, the report from Iron Mountain, which LBJ got so upset that it got leaked, and it talks about contriving a threat from outer space, you know. And then you have, you know, of course, Werner von Braun's deathbed testimony of the last card, which would be an extraterrestrial threat, which you know, he's been accurate so far, the Soviets. And then we had the terrorists, which happened just a couple months after we revealed it to the National Press Club. And then we had rogue nations. We definitely had North Korea and Iran as rogue nations. And then we haven't had the asteroid yet, but the next one following that is I don't know if they're going to stay in the sequence, but he's been spot on so far.
Right, and this possibility of a false flag alien attack, I mean, people have been speculating about it for years. I've done a webinar on it, and of course, as you mentioned, Carol Rosen has been talking about it since at least 2001, if not before then. So, you know, everyone is kind of like prepared for it. And it's like, well, is the deep state going to do it? I mean, we seem to be getting closer and closer to something happening. Some major things are going to be happening very, very soon. And, you know, the false flag alien invasion could be one of those cards that is played, or whatever is played. But one thing is clear, is that whatever is revealed is going to be just another psychological warfare program if it's just done by the same people that have been kind of like in control of this information for decades, whether it's the military intelligence community, whether it's the deep state through Operation Mockingbird, the mainstream press. And this is one of the things that really kind of like is worrying, is the way in which the mainstream media has this kind of like hypnotic hold over such a big percentage of the American population. How do you break out of that?
Turn the TV off. Yeah, I think everybody gets it. What happens is, how it's so effective is generational indoctrination. I used to watch the news with my father, watch Walter Cronkite, and we had no reason whatsoever, you know, just a reputable grandfather looking kind of man that's, you know, telling the news, and he wouldn't say anything that would not be true. Of course, you know, you find that he's a 33rd degree Freemason. But and then as that generation grows up, the children watch television with their parents. They don't believe that there's anything to be questioned, that's the real news. You know, I've got authoritative sources. I have the New York Times, I have Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC. These are authoritative sources. They double check the journalists and everything. The trouble is that the journalists that try to expose anything, they immediately get fired. In the talking points, as we all know, they're all shared amongst all of their controlled outlets that go all the way back to, you know, instead of May of 1954, having Eisenhower have public disclosure, which MJ-12 went behind his back and circumvented that with the agreement with the NIBU. Instead, a Nazi SS officer, former, set up the Bilderberg meetings, which they have the really secret meetings, and they, along with the Council on Foreign Relations, they control the sixth corporation. They give the talking points. They control the narrative of how the public is to perceive everything. And so I used to watch television to see, what are they going to do next? You know, I knew they were deceiving people, but after a while, it hurts your brain to watch somebody lying to you. and know that this is the information that there's a lot of people who are watching this same information and are completely believing it, and it's very disturbing. And so, I've turned off CBS and all the different networks some time ago, and strictly look at videos on Rumble or whatever, watch your channel and other people who I feel are reputable, to try to get more of an insight of what's actually going on. And how do you break out of it is the question. It's a hard one. It's a hard one because it's hard for somebody ever since their childhood that has trusted that one-eyed monster in the corner of the room to be giving you information, and to think that it's been deceiving you toward an agenda that's not for humanity all these decades. And so it's a hard one. It's like, and people are starting to realize that, even medical advice on the television could, if you don't know what's going on, can be harmful to you.
Well, it is a lot of perception management going on to kind of like ridicule the UFO topic and the extraterrestrial presence, and to just kind of like get people to think in these very limited terms. And we kind of see that right now happening around the planet. Right now, of course, everyone is focusing on Ukraine and what's happening there, and of course everyone's framing it in terms of, well, the Russians are trying to kind of like go in and clean up the Ukrainian state, which is a center for money laundering, child trafficking, and all of these nefarious things. And, from the Ukrainian perspective, it's all about standing up to this, Russian expansionism and aggression against smaller neighbors. But the truth is that there is an exopolitical element here, that what really is driving the conflict was that at some point, the US and Russia realized that there is this giant space ark buried under the sands of Oleshki Sands National Park in Ukraine's southern region. And so so they basically, both of them wanted to get control over that. And this is something that I think you find, if you look closely at every major international conflict, there's always an exopolitical factor there that's being ignored. So, what do you think of that? What do you think about this possibility that behind a conflict like Ukraine, that that there is this rival efforts by Russia and the United States to get control over that particular area because there's a buried space ark with all of these incredible technologies, and that a lot of the kind of psychological operations are really to kind of get people to be distracted by all this other stuff, but in reality it's all this race to find and get control over ancient extraterrestrial technologies.
You being a prior teaching professor of that subject at a major university, know that subject well. Without a question, every event, the Gulf of Tonkin, I had to go to Vietnam, 9/11, look at what happened with that. As General Wesley Lake, I think, talked about the 7 countries in 5 years or something like that, and then how they're going to take them out, and it was classified. They have alternative. There's usually when they do something, it serves, if they do something big, like it serves multiple agendas, and it's not what you see on television, what those agendas are. No question about that.
Well, I know the Iraq War, there's a good example, 2003. Supposedly that was about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction, but in fact what he had was a weapon of mass disruption, which was to reveal the truth about these ancient Anunnaki space technologies buried in the Sumerian area of Iraq, and he was going to reveal some of this stuff, and of course the US wouldn't allow this, and they just concocted this this false narrative that Saddam Hussein is building weapons of mass destruction, where he had no intent at all. I mean, he knew what was going on, but in fact, he had found the ancient stargates there in Iraq. He'd found some of the Anunnaki space technologies. I mean, even now, I mean, you have the truth coming out about this ancient kind of like area underneath the city of Nippur from ancient Sumer, and there's a sleeping giant down there, and that you know, it's like, well, and he has control over all of this ancient space technologies that the Anunnaki had, which even now the Americans and the Russians don't understand it. So yeah, I mean, Iraq was all about these exopolitical goals, and that everything around it was a distraction from the truth. And so, and this is the irony of it all, is that this whole subject of extraterrestrials and UFOs is ridiculed by mainstream scientists or academics. I mean, people would laugh me out of an academic institution now. I mean, they've forced me out already. I mean, they'd laugh me out if I started to talk about this stuff. But the truth is, it is really what is driving geopolitics.
Thank God they did. You know, you're doing some of the most important work on this planet is educating the public to some of this. Yeah, you know, this Rockefeller's Smithsonian Institute, you know, they're going talking about counter disclosure. They try to run around trying to hide all this information. And going back to ancient times, I could see the Anunnaki limiting our lifespan. So because when you get older after several decades, you start putting the pieces together, and you know, and then your body deteriorates, and then you have to reincarnate. And so I could see they can keep control of people, limiting their lifespans so they don't piece it all together. So, you know, hopefully we can give some indications for people to piece this together for themselves. And my recommendation is to trust no one, to do your own research and discover the truth for yourself. Should I go over a couple of pointers, Michael, to
Definitely, yeah. Those 20 kind of tips that you have at the end of your paper to identify counter-disclosure initiatives, because you know, this is where we are now. When you know, we're part of the truth-telling community. We're open to the truth. We're seeking it. You know, we're not vested in any one particular narrative. We're just seeking the truth. But there's a lot of people out there, a lot of assets out there that are trying to confuse us and misdirect us and put out this information. So yeah, you've got 20 tips to identify counter-disclosure initiatives. So do you want to just kind of like highlight the ones that you see as the most important?
Yeah, I'll just go really rapidly through this. Take note of previously unknown individuals in the disclosure community. All of a sudden suddenly appear that they're on a mission with every major voice in social media, as though they're on a mission. You know, somebody who all of a sudden out of nowhere starts talking about things that you never heard about this person before. They may sound like they know what they're talking about, but they have absolutely no credible evidence to back their testimony. There are witnesses or experiencers and contactees that do have credible evidence to back up what they're saying. Not everyone does. That doesn't mean that they're not credible. They seek to attack or attempt to discredit others and sow division in the community rather than unity, especially if the person is attempting to discredit represents a threat of disclosing truthful information they wish to to counter. Their narrative will sound somewhat believable with truthful information mixed in. This is in the CIA manual, by the way. They say, put 90% truth and mix in 10% of the narrative there. You want to take it, you know, so that it builds credibility with the people. So you have this truthful information mixed in, but note if the narrative is targeting another credible person with the exact opposite. In other words, if somebody says Mars has something on it, and they say just the exact opposite. I can't think of an example, but whatever they say, whatever the other person is saying, it's the exact opposite. It means they put these assets out there in order to target specific individuals so that it discredits them. Their testimony will change. It'll shift when they're giving their information. You'll find that they'll say one thing and then they're interviewed again, and it's not consistent.
If I jump in here, I just want to kind of jump in and
yes, please.
add to that. I mean, those are the first 5 points of your list of 20. I would say that we're seeing a lot of that happening right now. There's a lot of people out there who don't look at all of the different sources that have been coming out for years, putting out information, whether it's leaked documents, whether it's testimonies of all of these whistleblowers, insiders going back many decades, all of these documents that have been out there. These people will say, oh, I channeled my higher self and this is what's going on out there. Or they'll say, I remote viewed what's going on over there. I went into the space ark and that's what I saw over there. And it's like, remote viewing is an actual scientific protocol where you need to actually have a blind protocol where you have multiple people involved, so that way you don't front load. There's a lot of people that are putting out this kind of narrative, all based on their own personal subjective experiences, whether they are channeling some higher dimensional source, whether they're saying, oh, I'm remote viewing this and this is what's going on. It's like, at best, that's a supporting piece of evidence, which can be very helpful. But if you just put it out as the primary evidence, as the sole evidence, then you're likely putting out this information, or you are going to confuse and muddy the water, because you don't know who it is that you're channeling. It's like picking up a phone.
Yeah,
who's on the other end of the phone? They might tell you, I am the president of Russia or something, and I want to tell you something. I mean, there are these pranksters on the phone who fool people all the time, these Russian pranksters that do that all the time. So it's the same thing with channeling or accessing some source out there. You don't know. And similarly with remote viewing, you don't know how your subconscious influences things. So I always try to take the approach of have multiple sources and cross-reference. Don't just take one person's word for it. Look at multiple sources and cross-reference. And if all those sources agree, one can be channeled, one can be personal evidence in terms of what they've witnessed, another can be a leaked document. Just look at it all and put it all together, and you're more likely to be on the right track and putting out the truth, as opposed to maybe being an unwitting or an unwilling asset to one of these psychological warfare programs.
Absolutely. Anything that's channeled has to be highly, it can't even be included in this type of research. Now, you've been researching for decades, and you've done incredible scholarly work, and so you have a information base to pull from. And so that's my next point, is that if you research many of the secret space program whistleblowers or witnesses, there is a certain consistent amount of corroboration that they'll all say, oh, I was on board, Solar Warden, and had this operation on Mars or something, and it was this and that. And there's a certain degree of, corroboration between multiple secret space program witnesses. Then if you have somebody that comes out with something totally off the wall, it doesn't mean that they're not credible. It just means take note of it, because it's not going along with the consistent of what many witnesses are describing. These counter disclosure assets, that's what I term I use. They will claim somebody is like, oh, if they wanting to target somebody, they'll claim, oh, they just have a financial interest. This is what the CIA did back with the term conspiracy theory, to say that, oh, these people have interest in making money, half-baked theories and everything like that. So they wanted to discredit them. They'll say that they're connected with the CIA. Their information conflicts with historical authenticated classified documents. I've researched one witness that came out that he made a lot of claims, and his claims weren't totally against authenticated documents that said completely different. So, there is documentation on the history of all this, and you know that well, Michael. The disclosure asset may come out with entirely truthful information, but then they will start acting in discreditable ways. They'll do something that will be totally, will say, yeah, absolutely, the earth is flat, and they'll go on like that. So that's, in fact, that was a DARPA program that worked with social media. They may connect themselves with a noble cause, and they'll hide behind the noble cause by associating themselves with it. Also, look at their affiliations. Are they have connections with Air Force, Vatican, World Economic Forum, UFO groups? Who are they associated with? Look at who they associate with. Note if they're going on outlets that are discreditable, like there are certain outlets that kind of cater to kind of the loony side of the UFO topic. They'll put in religious aspects and try to make it like a religion thing, or they'll say that the person who's disclosing information over here is it's the demonic, they're work of the devil. They'll try to go at that end. You got to watch for those who are overly smoozing you. To flattery is one of the tactics that was in that GCHQ document that is used for counterintelligence.
I just want to jump in there.
Yes.
This is one of the things that we notice from the whole kind of ATIP program, and how certain people have been pushed into the mainstream media, getting a lot of attention. People know about the former head of ATIP, Luis Elizondo, and Christopher Mellon, and now you have some of these other people, Avi Loeb, who's running the Galileo project, and these people are getting a lot of mainstream media attention. And right there, you have to kind of like be suspicious. Like, what's the real agenda here? Why are these particular people being pushed and given this kind of like mainstream audience by the entertainment industry or the mainstream news industry, that they continue to have these people on their shows and interview them and talk about them? And the common thing, as far as some of these former ATIP people is concerned, is that they always depict the UFOs as a potential threat. And it's always about a threat, establishing this narrative that the UFOs are a threat. Just kind of establish that firmly in the mind, so that if they do decide to go ahead with the false flag alien invasion, the public's already been primed by these people from ATIP, Elizondo, Mellon, and others, who have been really priming the public with this idea of the extraterrestrials, or the UFOs at least, being this kind of unknown threat. And with the agenda of the Galileo project, that seems to be kind of like also feeding into this.
It's interesting you brought that up. I was doing a kind of a review on, let's see if I can find it here. course, you can never find stuff when you need it. Oh, here it is. Interesting. I was doing a review on Dr. Greer's movie Above Top Secret. And it's interesting. He says in the movie, or one of the people in the movie, he says, I think it's, quote, I think it's a disinformation campaign. It's like a magician. You're doing something over here, but you're going to have people focus over here. When you're not looking, you can pull a fast one. In fact, that all the major media is going through 5 guys, nobody else, the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you want to call it that. And he shows in the videos, he shows these 5 people, Luis Elizondo, Nick Pope, Jeremy Kenyon, Daniel Sheehan, and Christopher Mellon. It kind of surprised me he put Daniel Sheehan in there. I don't agree with everything Dr. Greer puts out, but I thought that was kind of a spot on observation, because the media is reeling these people out all the time, and they have a particular narrative that is, like you said, it's like the advanced, even the name of it, the Advanced Threat Identification Program, ATIP. It's all about this threat narrative, which goes along with the potential false flag, type of situation. But that was a very good point, Michael. Yeah, you do see these certain voices always being carted out in front and being the representatives of the subject. Let's see, they'll claim they have inside information from an intelligence source, but because of security matters, of course, they can't reveal who they are. If they're offered to do a polygraph exam, they will most likely decline. I thought it was interesting that Bob Lazar passed multiple ones. Travis Walton did as well. You have Randy Kramer passed the polygraph exam, and
Jason Rice
did as well. And some witnesses have declined, so it's important to pay attention. If somebody is telling the truth, they'll say, yeah, bring it on. I want to have this substantiated. And if they're presented the opportunity to testify under oath before a congressional hearing under the penalty of perjury, they will most likely decline. So this is a few tips to give the public to take note. And the only way, as you mentioned earlier, the only way is really to have kind of you have to research. You have to look at these different testimonies coming out and make sense for yourself. Don't just follow any particular person. But what happens is the truth has a way of revealing itself, and
Yep.
and the deceivers have a way of outing themselves.
Well, I especially like your tip number 17, that the counter-disclosure asset may use flattery in a way to be accepted by show hosts or groups in order to work their way into situations they want. Beware those who overly schmooze you. So yeah, that's very important. There are people who are very good at it. I mean, used car salesmen are very good at it. You go into a place where a con man may be operating. They're very good at schmoozing and kind of like using flattery to get you to believe in them. So we got to be on guard with people in this kind of exopolitical community or UFO study that also use that kind of strategy, that technique. So I think it's really great, Dan, that you've put together this list of 20 points for people to look at, to kind of like be on the guard for these kind of counter-disclosure initiatives. So where do people go to read your paper?
Oh, and my site started out, because a media company wanted me to write an article on media control, and after what I experienced in Washington, I gladly accepted, and so it started my journey on taking notes chronologically, and I put it up online. It's not a professional site, just my online notes at thewebmatrix.net, and I kind of do a chronology from the year 1900 to present day of things that kind of popped out for me. It's not complete by any means, but certain documents and witnesses, and then if you start seeing patterns, you can't say it's a matter of probability. You can't say anything 100% sure, but some things have a much higher probability of being true than other things. And so all you can do is look for the indicators that lead you to the higher probability of truth.
I think you're doing great work, Dan. Your website has a wealth of information on it. I recommend people go to the webmatrix.net, and there's a lot of papers there, a chronology of the whole UFO phenomenon. So it's been wonderful to have you again on Exopolitics Today, Dan. I look forward to our next meeting and discussion.
Michael, always such a pleasure to join you. It's wonderful to be able to talk with someone who has a background like you have in researching the subject for so many decades. And so we have a lot to reference. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.